Greetings, viewers. Second video on Adorno's contribution to the climate strike movement. And this is the notion of natural history. Read a section from Negative Dialectics. This is page 347 to 351, and it's entitled Natural History. And I'll just go ahead and read. Human history, progressive natural domination, continues the unconscious one of nature, of devouring and being devoured. Marx was ironically a social Darwinist. What the social Darwinists praised and wished to act according to is for him the negativity in which the possibility of its sublation awakens. A passage from the outline of political economy leaves no doubt as to the critical essence of his insight into natural history. And he quotes from Marx. And Marx says, "Now, as much as the whole of this movement appears as a social process, and as much as the individual movements of this movement proceed from the conscious will and particular ends of individuals, so much does the totality of the process appear as an objective context, which originates naturally, indeed proceeds out of the reciprocal effect of conscious individuals, but neither lies in their consciousness nor is subsumed under them as a whole," unquote. Marx's basic point is that what looks natural, the workings of the British market of Victorian England, is nothing of the sort. It's a very complex social set of institutions that have tense contradictions, and we need to understand it a lot better. So back to Adorno. Adorno continues, "Such a social concept of nature has its own dialectic. The natural lawfulness of society is ideology, to the extent it is hypostasized as an immutable given fact of nature. Natural lawfulness is real, however, as a law of motion of unconscious society, as it is pursued in Das Kapital from the analysis of the commodity form down to the theory of economic crisis and the phenomenology of the anti-spirit. The changes in each constitutive economic form took place like those of animal species, which arise and go extinct over millions of years." Unquote. So a tremendous insight in pointing that Marx was not a Darwinist in that sense. He appreciated the work Darwin had done, but his point was that we need to create a society where there isn't a struggle, this brutal struggle to survive. We need to create a society of abundance and not scarcity. Markets just create another kind of scarcity, the struggle over capital and wages and so forth, and they create all this immense destruction with them, and that's what we need to struggle against. You could summarize Adorno's insight in a single protest slogan, and you'll see this sign again and again, many of the protests of the climate strike movement. And the slogan is, "The seas are rising, and so are we." Great insight, great slogan, and kind of cuts to the essence of the chase by saying, yes, the rising of the oceans is not this neutral scientific thing. Of course, it's the result of our own actions as human beings, but we have the potential power of oceans. We have oceanic power in ourselves to change the world, and that's the thinking of natural history. That's a critical reading of natural history. Just a couple examples of the immense power of natural history on our own time period, and there are many, many examples. You can look at our technologies, our information technology, and the way that science turns into that, our space technologies and so forth. A couple of interesting examples. One is the space race program. This is not widely appreciated, but in fact the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union in the 1950s and 60s, one of its unintended consequences was a huge boost to the understanding of climate science. And this happened because both superpowers during that era sent probes to Venus. And before they'd sent probes, there was still science fiction in the day being written about how Venus was this, warm planet of marshlands and dinosaurs and so forth. Crazy adventures. And what they discovered was, no, Venus is a giant oven. And the reason is, Venus is the poster child of carbon dioxide runaway climate change or greenhouse effect. And that's because the atmosphere of Venus is 96.5% carbon dioxide. It's almost pure carbon dioxide. And so it just traps heat, and that temperature is some very high, about 900 degrees. I forget the exact number, but it's hot enough to melt lead, and no organic life form of any kind here on Earth could survive for very long in those conditions. And so there's a great example of what we're potentially capable of turning our planet into unless we get our act together and stop this madness completely and really put all of our efforts into shutting down all of our fossil fuels and building out terawatt scale solar wind storage. We have to do this as a species. And the other way that the natural history is relevant, the ways that the scientists are becoming political, and this is a very hopeful sign for the 21st century, that all the climate scientists have basically been sort of dragged into becoming experts on second nature. At the same time that those of us who study second nature, those of us who study humanities and teach and so forth, now have to pay attention to the climate science and read the IPCC report and become more familiar with that. And that's a very good thing. That's an excellent, wonderful thing, and we need a lot more of that. We need to tear down these walls between the second nature and natural history and have a critical understanding of both. And once we have that critical understanding, then we can change our planet and ourselves in a positive direction and build a future for ourselves that involves more than just survival, but a much better world for all living beings and for ourselves too.